It's strange because you're looking at it, you can't quite turn away, no matter how disgusted. You can't quite believe what you're seeing.
I'm not about to deny anybody's pain upon seeing these images, because of course they're disturbing.
Certainly, it's difficult to face things that are ugly in our history. But denial is worse.
Many, if not most, of the performers we think of as the very backbone of the film industry performed in blackface or approximate to it.
You can see Bing Crosby in Holiday Inn. You can see Fred Astaire in Swing Time. There are all sorts even poor little Shirley Temple.
Who told you to put that black on?
In just about every case, putting on the blackface becomes this way that white characters get to actually show their emotional selves. Characters bond, they get in touch with their feelings, and that's a fascinating dimension of what Black representation is doing there.
Some people think that Hollywood created these stereotypes. Hollywood did not create them.
Well, Hollywood has been a huge mechanism for perpetuating these kinds of performative traditions that date back to blackface minstrelsy.
We can't say conclusively how it got started or when, but we do know a pivotal time. And this was in the 1830s. There was an entertainer, Thomas Rice, who did a song called Jump Jim Crow,
in which he was doing a caricature of what he said was an authentic performance by a black stableman. He had seen this guy who worked around the horses.
And who did this dance, and he watched him and in essence sort of lifted it and then went in blackface, performed it very successfully. And it begins to spread, and eventually we get the minstrel troupes.
Minstrelsy was the primary mechanism for white people to see anything related to Black culture.
And what the minstrel shows were doing was to take any fear a white audience may have had about African Americans, to take that fear out of it. That these childlike figures, they can't hurt you. They can't supervise themselves. They're in need of supervision. And so this power balance where whites are in control of these untutored darky figures, it's justified.
It replicated what people romanticized about life in the antebellum South, because it was presenting a picture of slavery times in which slaves were happy, that they're dancing and singing and happy to be serving their masters, which is, of course, a grotesque misrepresentation of what the slave system actually was for not just the people who were enslaved, but the people who were the slave masters.
What I think is sometimes harder to see is the ways in which blackface performance afforded a certain kind of curiosity and fascination with African American life.
And so minstrel shows became an extremely popular American entertainment. In fact, people say that blackface minstrelsy is really the first American art form.
And it produced a sense of the national culture, and the national culture as predominantly African American. The massive irony of all this is that fundamental African Americanness
I am proud to present our star
is being produced by white men in blackface.
Hollywood certainly did not invent blackface. What the cinema does, though, is perpetuates and circulates these images far beyond what live theatrical performance could do.
What changes Hollywood is that sound comes in 1927. And ironically, who brings it in? The minstrel man himself, Al Jolson, with a movie called The Jazz Singer.
Wait a minute. You ain't heard nothing yet. Toot-toot-tootsie, goodbye. Toot-toot-tootsie, don't cry.
Jolson was known for his incredibly gregarious, buoyant, sort of energetic performance style. So when you watch him in The Jazz Singer, just the way that he kind of dances around as he's singing, he really gives us a sense of what must have been so appealing to audiences about blackface minstrelsy.
Don't cry, Tootsie, don't cry. Ah! Goodbye, Tootsie, I'm gonna bye. Mammy.
He has 2 blackface numbers. He can do songs without being in blackface, but he can't leave it behind.
The sun shines west, but I know where the sun shines best.
And the audience for Al Jolson I'm talking the white audience, doesn't want him to leave it behind.
Yes, I'm going up to heaven.
Wonderbar has one of the most exaggerated, extended blackface music performances in classic film. And Al Jolson plays this character who's going up to heaven, and it's a black version of heaven, or it's a white version of a black version of heaven. So pork chops are growing on the trees, and there's watermelons everywhere.
And here is a man who has risen to stardom on the idea of black culture. And you who have made a career of this, to further demean black people.
It's probably shocking to people now to see this and think, well, how was that possibly acceptable? But this kind of representation seemed perfectly fine to the powers that be because they maintain the status quo in terms of America's race relations. If there had been a questioning of the nostalgia that people had for the Old South, or if you have black characters who are asserting some kind of agency or even activism, God forbid, if you have characters, black and white characters, in some kind of intimate relation, those were the kinds of things that were being censored at the time.
And my feeling is that many of the people at that point working in movies were aware of blackface during vaudeville and may have had some kind of nostalgia for it or felt that it was entertainment value in it.
So you get such strange things like Fred Astaire's celebration of Bill Bojangles Robinson in the movie Swing Time.
Fred Astaire always talked about how important black tap dancers were to his development. And Bill Bojangles Robinson, he always said, was one of his heroes.
When we see Fred Astaire, he's got on the flashy jacket and so forth. And there's footage of Bojangles dancing where he's wearing a suit and tie, well tailored.
It's a tribute, but it's also a way for Fred Astaire to demonstrate that he's taken the best from the best. He can profess all the love in the world for Bill Bojangles Robinson, but Astaire becomes a much bigger star than Bojangles Robinson. And he has many more kinds of opportunities that are ever available to Robinson.
I don't want to be unfair to Fred Astaire because I think he did appreciate Bojangles, but it still comes across in another way. Why did you have to choose these clothes? Why did you have to choose this particular style to salute him? And again, it's this minstrel thing.
Well, you see blackface kind of taper off in Hollywood films in the late 1930s, early 1940s. And with World War II, This country is under a lot of pressure, if it's fighting fascism abroad, to demonstrate that it really is a model of democracy in the world. And so the Negro problem becomes a very difficult problem for the United States to explain on an international stage.
I suppose we still contend with it today because we live in a society structured in racial dominance that both loves multiplicity and African-American art forms, but doesn't know how to handle them, doesn't know how to deal with them, and certainly doesn't respect them.
And that's why we really have to stay on top of it. And even all of these intellectual theories about what it means and so forth. All right, but I also just say, it's insulting.
It's crucial to recognize the kinds of things that people like Richard Pryor or Dave Chappelle, we could even bring Tiffany Haddish into this conversation, the way that more contemporary Black artists have struggled with this shadow of blackface minstrelsy in an attempt to really recover some of the things that are so valuable and important and life-giving about Black humor, about Black musicality.
We all expect some dancing when the minstrels come to town. So now may I present to you Mr. Rufus Rastus Jefferson Davis Brown.
There's no excuse in the present digital moment for remaining in darkness about the histories of these films, the cultural histories that they reflect.
Showing the films does not mean that you're basically saying it's all right. You're just showing a film as it was and as problematic as it may be.
You can have conversations with people about these things too, so that you don't just consume them in isolation, but instead become curious and really studious about understanding where they come from.
I think that, people, if they want to see these films, should have the opportunity. It is history.
That's why we watch movies. You want to look hard at American life. That's what it is, and it's worth contending with.